Hello, I'm Annette Young and welcome to the 51%, a show about women reshaping our world. Coming up, as the war continues in Gaza, pregnant Palestinian women are facing dire conditions as they give birth due to damaged hospital facilities, along with restricted access to medicines. Also, a tale of gains and losses. I'll be talking shortly to journalist Josie Cox, who's just written a book entitled Women, Money, Power, focusing on the battle for financial equality. And renowned cartoonist Posy Simmonds becomes the first ever British illustrator to win the Grand Prix at the Angouleme Comics Festival here in France. But first, and as fighting continues in Gaza, the United Nations estimates that there are some 50,000 pregnant women in the war-torn territory. In the few functioning maternity units, mothers have brought new life into a world under bombardment in extremely cramped and dire conditions. This report from our colleagues at France 2.
In this sprawling tent camp in Rafah, in the south of Gaza, young mothers rest in their makeshift shelters. They rarely go outside. That's the case for 25-year-old Basma, who just gave birth to Salma.
I left the hospital 2 hours after she was born. I didn't stay long enough. The doctor saw me and my baby just once.
Basma fled Gaza City when she was 7 months pregnant, on foot, and with her 2 children and husband, Ziad.
I was afraid for my wife and the baby. She had already had a miscarriage.
According to UNICEF, a baby has been born every 10 minutes in Gaza since the 7th of October. At this maternity hospital in Rafah, there's a constant procession of beds carrying women in labour. There are 150 births every day compared to 40 prior to the war. Dia looks over her newly born daughter.
This war has brought so much suffering, and now I fear for my health and the health of my baby.
Her mother says she was weak when she arrived at the maternity.
She was malnourished and experienced dizziness throughout her pregnancy.
This facility allows new mothers to stay no more than 6 hours after giving birth. Over in the neonatal intensive care unit, the urgency becomes all the more clear. Newborns have to share incubators with 2, sometimes 3 squeezed inside. And it's not just premature babies. There's also a lack of beds. One of the incubators has broken down, leaving 12. It's not enough.
We can't cope. 2 or 3 babies per incubator is no good from a sanitary point of view. But we've got no choice.
A mother cries in the corridor. She says nobody is helping her child. The doctor is constantly solicited by worried mothers, even though this hospital does not provide consultations.
I have a cold and I'm contagious. My baby's suffering because of me.
The child is having difficulty breathing. He's barely a month old, and the care he needs is not available.
And a UN team has been in Israel to investigate reports of sexual violence during the Hamas-led attacks on October 7th. The Israeli officials say Hamas militants carried out a range of brutal sexual assaults on Israeli women during their attacks on communities in southern Israel, Hamas having denied the reports. Now, here's some good news of sorts. According to the Washington Post, over the next 10 years, women in America will have greater economic power than their predecessors. The newspaper's saying women have been obtaining more college degrees than men for more than 20 years, while the number of women leading top corporations has grown by 10%. But, of course, gross inequities still continue. For instance, women are still spending more time caregiving and many retiring with far less compared to men. Financial journalist Josie Cox has just written a book aptly entitled Women, Money, Power, focusing on the battle for financial equality, and joins me today from New York. Josie, thank you so much for your time. With what I've just said, your book is very much a timely reminder of our fight for financial freedom, but it really is a tale of both gains and losses, isn't it?
Yes, and absolutely, it always is the case with topics around gender inequality and gender equality at that it's this sort of undulating tale of progress and setback, of gains and losses. And that's really what I tried to spell out in my book. In part, the book is very much a tale of unsung heroes, the women through history since the Second World War here in America who have fought unequivocally and untiringly for equality in the labour force and beyond. But also, the book seeks to ask the question of, considering how much effort we've put in, considering all this hard work that all these people who came before us have succeeded in accomplishing, why are we still talking about such extreme inequality in the labour market and in the economy? Why are women in this country still, on average, only earning 82 cents to every dollar that a man is earning? Why are so many women leaving the labour force after starting a family, for example?
And it's not just happening in the US, but elsewhere across the world, of course, Josie. But in the prologue, you write about an interview you had with a leading male CEO, which effectively became the reason for this book. So tell us more, Josie.
Yes, indeed. I mean, the idea for the book had obviously been bubbling for some time. I've been covering this topic for many years, but it was at the beginning of the pandemic when I had this opportunity to speak to a CEO of a very, very large corporation. We spoke off the record, which meant that I will never say who that individual was. But we were chatting about this gender pay gap in his company and more broadly. And I was just very curious to hear what he thought about the reasons why the gender pay gap was still so prevalent and so pernicious. And the explanation that he provided me at that time was that sometimes when a woman decides to start a family, to have a child, and to leave the labour force temporarily to take a maternity leave, when she comes back after that leave, she's sometimes just not as professionally ambitious as a man in her position might be. And I was absolutely floored by that explanation, because I thought of it so oversimplified, such a complex and such a poorly understood issue. And it also placed the onus squarely on women to essentially fix themselves and fix the problem single-handedly. And to me, that was just a call to action. It meant that we needed a lot more education on this topic, and I felt like it was my duty to be part of that education.
And you use, as you say, the tales of key individuals, such as the woman whose fortune helped create the birth control pill, and others who have helped shape our financial freedom.
Yes, and in a way that was one of the greatest privileges of writing this book, you know, of really delving into the stories of these women who have largely been written out of history or were never written into history in the first place, but who really dedicated their entire lives to achieving some semblance of gender equality in their particular field of work. The woman that you mentioned who funded, essentially almost single-handedly funded all the research and development, is a huge reason why we have access to the oral contraceptive pill in many parts of the world, and particularly in the US today. And I think it's so important that we really understand upon whose shoulders we stand when we are continuing this fight for gender equality.
And coming back to that Washington Post article, it says that the ripple effects of the shift of female financial power will change the economic landscape. But do you share that optimism, Josie?
That's the hope. I think when we're talking about statistics like this and like the ones you just cited, one of the things we really have to be aware of is that statistics usually only tell part of the story. And yes, what we have seen over the past 20 years is that more women are graduating from college, which of course is a wonderful thing. We're seeing that more women are out earning their partners in heterosexual relationships, which is also a wonderful thing for female economic empowerment. What that statistic isn't telling us is how many women are leaving the paid labour force after starting a family, how many women are still having to make that really difficult decision between professional advancement and personal fulfillment, between care work that is usually unpaid and between really staking out a career in the paid labour market.
Josie Cox, I'm afraid that's all we have time for. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
And renowned cartoonist Posy Simmonds has become the fifth woman and the first ever British artist to win the Grand Prix at the Angouleme Comics Festival here in France, considered the world's most prestigious award for graphic novelists. Better known as a press cartoonist in Britain, Simmonds is more celebrated in France for her graphic novels, including Gemma Bovary, which is considered to be an iconic masterpiece. Emerald Maxwell has more.
Working from her 12th floor flat in London, the queen of the British graphic novel, as she's known in France, fills her sketchbooks with her gently satirical drawings and text.
One of my characters is a butcher.
7 years after chairing the jury at the Angouleme Comics Festival, Posy Simmonds is now one of the very few women to have taken home the prestigious Grand Prix.
Bande dessinée and comics has been quite a boys' club for a long time, and certainly over the last decades women have infiltrated it, and so of course I'm really pleased to be one of them.
She's best known in the UK for her press cartoons that send up modern British society. But in France, one of the most avid comic consuming nations in the world, it's Posy Simmonds' graphic novels that have a following. A pioneer of the genre, Simmonds intersperses long text with her illustrations and cheekily reimagines female characters from 19th century literature.
Men never get asked, why they write about men. It's, if you think of Asterix, it's full of blokes. I write about women, probably because I know what it's like to be a woman.
Bonjour, Madame Bovary.
Simmonds is also applauded for her work's crossover to the big screen, including Gemma Bovary, her graphic novel which started its life as a comic strip in the Guardian newspaper, inspired by the bored heroine of Gustave Flaubert's Madame Bovary. Simmonds is now working on a new book based in the early 60s, taking a look at a period she describes as just before the Beatles and the pill.
And that's it for now. And we would love to hear from you, so do reach out to us via Facebook, Instagram or X, of course, formerly known as Twitter. So until our next show, bye for now.
Between 2012 and 2014, the Syrian conflict spilled over into one of the biggest cities in Lebanon, Tripoli. Symbolically divided by Syria Street, the Sunni and Alawite neighborhoods were plunged into a war that was not their own. 10 years later, an uneasy peace has returned, but deep scars remain. Watch Tripoli, Syria Street, revisited on France 24 and France24.com.